hard to know if the audience is kind of where they are and so on. And I will say I'm one of the worst people when it comes to webinars. If switch my camera off, it's so easy to start doing my emails or whatever. I'm in this choir here, Marissa, and we're doing the stuff via Zoom and those things in the evening. I must be honest, at some points I'm like, switch the video off, have a glass of wine, and then I get back into the choir. So, and I know it's also at the end of the work day for you all. So I'll do my best to make it worth your while to be here. Please drop, I see the chats actually flip up for me as little messages. So feel very free to just write things in the chat as we go along. I said to Marissa, I could talk for 45, I could talk for a long time. Be much more useful, though, that I'll start off with something of a talk so we've got something to, I guess, focus on. But then really the interesting thing is actually to have questions. And I mean, there are people here working in very, very interesting contexts in the Engage program, working on the Mamelodi campus. There's a lot about your context I don't understand or know that well. So what I put forward as ideas may or may not be that relevant to you. So, or you may have some kind of really interesting responses. So please take it in that spirit. This is some work I've been doing the last while. And some things I've been thinking about for a long time. So it's also, the intention of the talk is definitely to be provocative. So let's hopefully do that. If it gets you thinking, even if you realize you disagree with me, that's, I guess, part of the value of today. So I used a quote from a student, said something, you'll see the quote soon, just flipping through the slides. And I want to talk about teaching and learning in science and engineering, which has been my interest for a very long time, both practically and in my research. So here's this project that we've got presently. These are second-year engineering students. They're across universities in UK, South Africa, and the US. But it's interesting, some commonalities of how they talk about the experience of teaching and learning. There's the first quote, which is where I got the title from. This one said, the teachers I like is when they do it on the board. It's more I can't just flip through the slides. The next student says, there's some lectures where you think, why am I here? They're so awful. You just, every time I go, I'll sit there, I'll be angry with myself for going because I just think there are better things I could be doing with my time. Some of them just read off the slide. I think it's useful, says the third student, if the lecture is interactive, rather than just reading off a slide, have a few more, the student says, TED Talk style lectures. I feel if they don't do examples in class, well, for me, for a lot of my students, it's pointless. You hear the theory, but it's like the theory doesn't go into your mind if you don't get an example. Examples are really important. Another one says, some lecturers just read their slides. I might as well read the slides at home. And here's another thing. Does somebody stuck things on a slide? So I don't know how familiar to you some of these comments feel, might even be in your own experiences of, there's this real, we've forgotten that there were days before something called PowerPoint. And I still think it's not a sort of unmitigated good that so many lecturers use this tool that was designed really for business talks for teaching. And that's part of my interrogation. I'm interested in your thoughts about that. So you've all heard this thing. I mean, in response to students saying my lecturer just reads off the slide and so on, you've heard this like, don't be the sage on the stage, be the guide on the side. And you've heard these general critiques that there are about lecturing. So I've kind of been thinking about this for a bit. I'm sure you've seen articles like these ones, how to make your teaching more engaging. Let's see if the animations work. I've got a weird feeling that's not going to work. Okay, no, they don't work, so don't worry. Don't need the animations. There were a couple of articles. One said like how I stopped lecturing too much and how I became more interactive, etc., etc., etc. Briefly, really, what I want to do, which I've started hinting at, there's so much advice out there on what lecturers, science and engineering, sometimes here you'll see I use engineering, but actually science and engineering lecturers should be doing, what they're doing wrong, what they're not doing, and so on. And especially, I guess I wrote this talk thinking about new lecturers especially. But But all of us are still learning, to be honest. I taught first year students this morning, first year engineering students. How do you spend your limited time? What do you focus on? What's important? Is it important to have beautiful slides? Is it important to be doing active learning and what people say? So here's a piece you could read. And there was an earlier talk I did, sort of starting my provocations in this area, that became an editorial. It's there, and I think Marissa will send it out. But I wanted here to sort of look more at the kind of interview data that I presented a bit to start with. Is what do students say matters in their experience of teaching? So, and this kind of is my question. This really is the, time is very limited. Many of us also have to do research in our lives and administration. What are the things you should really, really focus on? So just briefly, I mean, Marissa explained some of this where I'm from. So I am presently at Virginia Tech in the USA. I'm a department head of a Department of Engineering Education. There's that third bullet. Sorry, that's out of date. It's actually 3 years. And prior to that, I was at the University of Cape Town in chemical engineering. So I think I also just wanted to share how I think about education. There's so much rhetoric in the space. There's so many people telling you what you should do. And one thing especially important now, I was reading an article, and it's interesting, we're doing this talk through a tool called Blackboard, and there are other tools like Zoom, and there's a lot of money has been made in technology that has been bought by educational organizations. So it's quite hard to tease out sometimes the education arguments from all the other agendas that they serve. I'm always interested, my second bullet there, thinking historically, how do we get here? How do the parts interact? And what I put here a sociological perspective, and I'm not going to talk a lot on that today, but that's what I've kind of also really tried to work with. I just was looking at Mariki's comment in the chat. Please feel free to write things as we go along. And Mariki, later on, I want to hear a little bit more on your idea of a third alternative. I've got a bit of a third alternative in this talk. So, yeah, the centering of the discipline, that's where I'm going to definitely be getting to. So I've always been interested in what do students say about their experiences of teaching and learning. Here's the project I mentioned. It's just been quite exciting for the first time having a real international project. 3 different countries, 6 universities, 2 in each country. We're actually following chemistry and chemical engineering. And I still need to say what an honor it was to be invited to do in 2017 invited lecture at the Department of Chemistry at the University of Pretoria, the Victor Pretorius lecture, because of course, as Marissa said, I haven't taught chemistry that much. I've more been teaching chemical engineering, but it is certainly where I first started my thinking. So I'm quite excited about this project because we're tracking students in these 2 disciplines. And in short, we're trying to see what's the difference between the science and the engineering degree. And we're all finishing off the 4th year of data collection. We're following students all the way through their degrees. So here in this talk, though, I just take a very small slice of some second year data that I'd worked with. So here's really the essence of the talk, and it's not that surprising, but the interest for me is in the detail. So I guess the question was for this, what do students value? So the first bullet is, yay, active learning is true. Students value interaction. They really do. That is at the heart of what we do in teaching. The second point, though, will not surprise any of you in the subjects that I've seen that you are teaching, mathematics and the language and study skills teaching. They want explanations. And then the third point, good explanations, that I think has been less spoken of, is how students use resources, which is a growing interest for me. So just a little bit of flavor under each of these themes. Around interaction, students importantly don't just say engagement. They actually they're trying to pass exams, and they're trying to pass courses, and they are difficult, challenging courses, and they want people to help them when they have questions. And there's a little quote but a student saying it's good, I can come and see them in their office. Of course, now it's virtual, ask them questions. The second bullet has been to me so powerful through all my teaching. When you actually get to know students, know something of their lives, it is incredibly powerful. I've always thought it's worth the effort to try and learn students' names. It's interesting. It's easier to learn names through online teaching in the synchronous thing because their names are on the screen. But it's to me, it's been really valuable in my teaching throughout. And then, as I said, students in this study, and we've got programs that are really good programs in the study, but very few students talked about the sort of traditional, the kind of, not traditional, non-traditional type of active learning pedagogies. They talked more about getting help with question and answering, but there was one lecturer that they spoke about who really did do this, and it made a huge impact on students. Here's what they described. They said, he walks around the class, actively engaged with the class, he asks questions, you're always on your heels because you don't know if you're going to be asked a question next. The question aren't asked in a mean spirit, they're just asked to keep you awake and get you involved. But you might look a bit silly if you don't answer the question, or if you give a silly answer. It keeps the attention of the class. And Majosi, what a brilliant comment on technology. There's lots of different arguments out there on using technology, and I think the issue around driving learning specifically, we'll chat a bit more on that. Majosi, it'll be nice to hear you verbally in the question time as well. Under the topic of explanations, and this is not surprising, again, students really spoke about lecturers who can go through examples, explain things, working out the standard thing we've always been doing, where we work out sample problems for students. Might seem like very untrendy these days. It's very powerful for students to learn how to think. And here's another one I just couldn't resist. There was so much in the study about students finding PowerPoint passive, and actually often a valiant of people who use classical blackboards. By the way, these are all from before this COVID year. So just to say that I did most of the work on this analysis about a year ago on this particular analysis. This third point really interested me. So students spoke about resources, and I know exactly what they're talking about because I've done the same thing. I've said, I'm not giving you the solutions for this thing because you need to work it out for yourself or whatever. I've been one of those lecturers. And we do these things to try and structure students in learning in particular ways. But it is interesting how they talk about it. Here's their feelings is that we're often withholding things from them. Here's the first one. Students complain he doesn't put up his PowerPoints. He works quickly. A student can't write everything. He said, but the PowerPoints are for me. They're not for you. The book is for you. Work through the book. I mean, that sounds pretty brutal if you ask me. The next one is, again, when you ask, can you put the answer up on like Blackboard or whatever? He says, no. The worked examples, he's not uploaded the answer. He was like, oh, you should come to the lectures. The last piece here, we have tutorials, but we're not allowed solutions. I'm interested in your views on these comments. So I guess just to sort of try and tie together what I'm sort of saying in this talk, and really, this is how I understand the rhetoric on active learning, is that there's this like false dichotomy. First, just there is a dichotomy or polarity. The argument is there's this terrible stuff that we all used to do called transmissive and teacher-centered teaching. And now we all need to move to the right thing, which is on the right-hand side here, which is active learning, student-centered. There's definitely a bad and good thing. Why I call this as a false dichotomy? False dichotomy is when you're told, here's two alternatives, and you kind of feel pushed to go choose between them, whereas in actual fact, those aren't your only choices. And so I guess what I've argued, which I do in that paper, is that these are not really like it's one or the other. I think there's a kind of third way. And by the way, third way I know is not the right word because that refers to like Blair's politics of the 90s. I think I came to call it third approach in this paper, where teaching is focused on student engagement with knowledge. So it actually pulls together, I like to think, the best parts of both of those poles. Here's a student quote that I think speaks to both pieces. It says, there are a lot of good lecturers, and they're clear. Some lecturers are not clear, and they act as if you should know it already. It'd be frustrating. There are lecturers who are clear, but when you have a problem, they never reply to the emails. I think students want both this clarity of explanation, but they want the ability to interact and engage. And really, to be honest, I'm drawing here on Paul Ashwin's work, some of you know about. Paul's argument that, student-centered learning is a great idea. It recognizes that teaching and learning is about the student and what they're learning. But Paul argues in this article that it simplifies the educational process, that we lose sight of the importance of engagement with knowledge, the importance of teacher expertise, and indeed the role of institutions. And I'm very taken by that argument that he puts forward. Just let me just quickly, sorry, one thing. It's one thing I forgot to do before I started talking. I have a coffee machine right next to my desk here, and it was about to warm itself up. Just getting to my last few points here. Sorry about that interruption. I guess to get really practical, and these are, I've worked with new lecturers and peer lecturers through the years. If someone says, what advice would you give me? This would be my summary. I think it's really, I gave a talk on this for, what was it? Heltassa. I think I got an award for teaching, and I did a little talk that's somewhere still on YouTube there. I think it's absolutely awful because it was videoed at UCT and someone put this terrible makeup on me. But I think the essence of what I was saying was about the same as what I'm saying in this talk. I really think the first point is you have to understand the material you're teaching. This seems very obvious, but you would be surprised that people think they can go out there and they never really wrapped their head around something and they think they can teach it. I find that bizarre. It's very obvious to students when you don't know what you're actually doing. And I don't mean you need to know everything on the whole topic. You certainly need to understand what you're trying to convey to them. The second point, this is to me the essence of, and Marissa, what a wonderful point. You only understand the material when you've taught it. This is the bliss of teaching. The second point, be interested in whether your students are actually learning. Again, seems very obvious, but it makes it's so obvious to students, and it's not even necessarily about knowing very cool active learning things. I've done previous work following quite traditional lecturers where their interest in student learning just shines through. This is my answer on active learning, is my third bullet, which is, Pasha, use clever pedagogies when you can to make it easy for students to ask questions. And I've explored lots of different ways of doing that. And it is actually an interesting thing about teaching online and using the chat as we are doing right now. And number four, you can see I'm a little bit of an animus about PowerPoint. Maybe just because I said earlier up front, I get easily distracted when people put me to sleep with what I call in here death by bullet point. And then number five is this really interesting point about our practices with withholding resources from students and whether that always makes sense. I think it's an open question. I'm nearly at the end of the talk, and I think I'm sort of time-wise, where I want to be. For those of you, many people here are also researching. I've written here engineering education research, but I think this would also apply to those who do science education, chemistry education, physics education. I think this focus to prove which are effective teaching methods, we often miss a lot of detail. I'm interested in the detail. I'm surprised how little detail knowledge we really have about students' experience of PowerPoint lectures. And you can see, I don't have a simplistic view on lectures. I think there's nothing. I think a powerful lecture is an incredible teaching tool. But I do think that using slides can really make it harder sometimes to interact with students. And I do think we have less research than we need, although a lot of it's coming out this year, of course, is how students are using online resources. So that's the end of my talk, just to acknowledge so many different institutions and people I've worked with. I certainly couldn't name them all. It's a great project that I'm presently involved in, and obviously the institution that I'm presently at, I'm still an honorary professor at UCT and involved in quite a few things there. So I think I can stop sharing my slides, because then at least that screen will sort of open up. And I was told how to, yeah, there we go. Stop sharing. There we are. Marissa, I think, are you going to chair the questions now? I'm very happy for you to do that.
If you also want to jump in and you see something interesting, I think that you really gave a very punchy, powerful, lots of good points, and I hope that people that will generate a lot of questions beyond the ones that people asked along the way. Please, Jenny would like to see your faces. So when you do answer the question, just put the camera on briefly so she can see you. Mariki, I gather that the camera means you'd like to ask a question.
Thanks, Jenny. I think we're on the same page. You, with your third option, you're what I wanted to share. There's so much overlap, but I wondered whether Marissa would allow me to show a particular visual image. Something that dawned on me about 12 years ago, as I was reading the book by Parker Palmer, The Courage to Teach, where he engaged with this idea of where we traditionally came from a teacher-centered education, and then we trumped the idea that it should be a student-centered education. And he was saying what we're actually doing is we place somebody at the center of where knowledge flows through, that doesn't know the big picture, that does, and sometimes have got quite have got ideas about what will be good for him or her, that you as an experienced teacher knows is not good for them, or unlikely to be good for them. And so he came up with some, and then it dawned on me that what he was talking about, the discipline-centered education, has a visual. So Marissa, would you allow me to show that?
I've made you a presenter, so you should be able to.
So how do I do that? I go somewhere and I say,
you go to the right bottom corner below the participants, and there's something called their content.
I've got it. So I will share. I will share files. Okay, and I would love to show. Okay. No, I'm going. What do I share exactly? The whiteboard or my screen? My screen.
Not the whiteboard. Okay. Not the whiteboard.
I'll share my screen.
Any one of the other options. You can sort of see the thing on your computer. Just press that.
Here it is. Do you see it?
Yes,
I hope you see it. So this is the metaphor for discipline-centered teaching, and I have always taught with this in mind. Where you sit, the metaphor of sitting around the campfire, where the fire is your discipline, and when you say you want to have your students focused and engaging with knowledge, that's exactly what you do. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with your students, and you introduce them to the discipline that you're so passionate about. They develop a relationship with that discipline themselves. And Parker Palmer was making the point that we know our disciplines are very good at disciplining us if we don't engage with it properly. You know, you can just think about maths. You make a mistake and you get punished. The answer is wrong. So we shouldn't try and be in between. We should encourage them to engage with the discipline authentically, and that take responsibility for learning. It's almost as if that fire that jumped into your heart because I love my organic chemistry, I'm passionate about it. They develop a relationship with that fire themselves, and also have this glow because they've taken it on. They have accepted the challenge. They've been punished and fingers were burnt a few times, but they rise to the occasion and they own it. And it will keep being alive in them as long as they kindle that fire. Just sharing that, I thought you might like it.
Thank you very much, Mariki. The issue of ownership, I think, is a very powerful one. Ina has a question there that she's typed into the chat box.
Can I just comment on what Mariki shared, and then definitely, I think Majosi also might want to ask a question, Marissa. But just to respond, Mariki, I think another model, I like what the fire image you gave us. Another model that's very interesting is called the didactic triangle, based on the concept of didactic, which is a sort of European theorization of teaching and learning. And the triangle is pretty simple. It has teacher at one apex, student at one apex, content at the third apex. And you can see that it gives you three different relationships: teacher to student, teacher to content, student to content. And I guess in a way it's another model of exactly what you just represented to us now.
Can I just interrupt, Mariki? Press that white circle with a square in the middle. And that'll stop you sharing the screen.
Yeah, we've got loads of stuff.
I'm trying to close it.
Of your computer thing. That's it, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take Ina and then Bonza.
Thank you, Marissa. Actually commend being in the position now where I do a lot of peer reviews. I find that lecturers often have an expert blind spot. They would say, I don't understand why students don't get it. And it's actually just a sign then that they expect students to have the same broad-based knowledge that they have. And I encountered once in a stats class that the lecturer told me he does not give the answer to a class question. Every day he gives a problem to be solved, but he never gives the answer. So obviously they took him out in the pink forms. Our pink forms are the student feedback forms. And then I gave him a good suggestion. I said to him, okay, tell the students you're now going to call this problem the box office problem. And then bring a box to class, and if there's no solutions in the box, then you don't need to give the answer. But if there are solutions, then you can put that on your camera, because the value of learning from mistakes are then there. And you don't have to, it's anonymous, so nobody's ashamed. But he said on day one, he had 3 in the box, and the next day the box was half, because the students immediately realized what they are learning from each other's mistakes as well, and not only correct answers.
That's fabulous. And what a cool technique as well. Yeah, I go back to actually what Marissa said early on about, and Marissa's work on pedagogical content knowledge with Betty David-Roberts as well has been very influential to me. Because if you're not curious about your subject, there's a particular kind of curiosity you should have about your subject matter, which is really gets deepened by teaching. I've only taught first and second year university courses. I once taught a little bit of third year, but honestly, I haven't taught stuff that's of the most sophisticated in my discipline, and I've taught so much first year. But even some of the most basic things, I get like new insights all the time when students ask you questions, come at it differently. But if you don't have that curiosity, then you shouldn't be teaching. You should go, and nowadays at least a lot of research-focused positions you can go and do that. But yeah, anyway, let me stop rambling. Marissa, I said you could share, and then I started messing with you. So I don't know if you want to ask a question or
Bonza, do you want to say something about what you put in the chat box?
Sorry, is Majosi the surname and Bonza is the first name? I got that the wrong way around.
Matter. I'm sure he's quite happy.
For me, it was just a comment on interaction, because I'm in the education technology space, and I find that most of the time there's more emphasis on the technology. other than how are we supposed to use the technology as a tool for teaching and learning. And with being fully online, I think globally, it's as if academics now need to master first, and then see how they can use it on their teaching and learning. So it's a sort of a very new space, which then forces everyone to be the guru of the technology now, just to be able to bring those effective pedagogies that you were talking about.
So, Bonds, I really like your comment there. There's 2 points I would pick up on that I think are really absolutely spot on. So, technology is just a tool. It's just a tool. But as I said, there's a lot of business interests that are also at play to try and persuade us about the significance of technology in and of itself. It's a tool. And then I even think in how I do understand that, I mean, depending which university you're talking about, people may have different levels of familiarity with technologies, but actually, I sometimes think we miss the point there because we all learn new technologies all the time. Like, how do you put an app on your phone? I mean, even my mother can do that because our lives are just. I remember my mother first used an ATM. It was like a big deal. We have been learning to engage with new technologies all the time, and definitely, you've got to learn. You've got to have a community of people who can share skills. Like the first time I did a breakout, I'd never done breakout rooms in Zoom, and I had to learn that. On the other hand,
I did it this morning, and I'm telling you, it's the first time I was so stressed.
Yeah, no, so indeed, but I think it's also about how we see teaching, how we support each other. So absolutely breakout rooms, and I mean, I'm teaching a class of like 70-something first-year engineering students. And they're in, obviously allocated teams. A lot of it is quite team-based work. And the first time I really tried the thing, it was a complete disaster. And I had to manually put 70 students all into the groups quickly. And I was like a little bit frazzled at the end. I thought I'm never doing this again. But of course, we're in my department. We're a community of something like 20 people teaching in the space. And there's all people who know more than you. There's also people who know less than you. How do you learn? I mean, I'm teaching students programming at the moment, which you'd find laughable. I mean, what do I know about programming? The answer is really not a lot. I know enough. I'm teaching MATLAB, so that I know enough of what we're trying to do in the first year space. But actually, it's also, I do appreciate you've got to have a bit of confidence, and you've got to not feel that you're going to be shown up as ignorant in front of your students. But I mean, the reality is you've got to be flexible also when the thing doesn't work. But I still think I think you are right that we come to this technology issue from the wrong angle. So I really like that point, Bonza. That's great. I should have known. Majosi is a good surname in your neck of the woods, isn't it?
Oh,
My good colleague Toko Majosi, I can't remember which institution Toko is at now, but he's one of the top chemical engineering researchers in the country. I don't know if it's a family member.
okay, I have a comment from Gideon. Sorry, Gideon. I'm not calling you by your surname. Gideon, would you like to put a voice on that?
Yeah. Well, let me just for a second switch on the camera, and then I can. Oh.
You got stage fright.
Stage fright. Yes, I definitely have stage fright. Yeah. Okay. That's more than enough.
Okay. That's fine. No, keep talking. I'm fine. That's
Yes.
no problem, Gideon.
Now well, now that we have to do everything online, it is a lot of changes that we had to make because I always used slides just for the theory, but everything I'm a math lecturer, so everything that I teach, I always do on the board, or if there's no board, like on the Groenkloof campus where the education students are, then I'm on Mamelodi campus, so then you have to use the the data projector board, but I mean, you physically do the steps in front of their eyes. Now, it's slightly more complicated, so I had to type out almost everything. But what I do is I jump between these two poles that you've mentioned now. On the one side, when I take the lead, but then sometimes I take it back to them and say to the students, okay, here's the next example. You are going to do it. I'm going to switch off my mic. I give you 2 minutes, quickly do the sum. And then after 2 minutes, I said, okay, let's check. And then I show them on the next slide the complete steps and say, okay, did you make mistakes? Is there a question? And then they can say to me, sir, I made a mistake here. Or they say, no, I got it right. Whatever. But it's quite complicated to get them involved, because I'm a very interactive person when I teach. And to get them involved now with the online is very hard, because you have hundreds of faces sitting there quietly look at you. You make a joke and you don't hear any laugh that comes back, nothing. You just have to continue and continue. But yeah, well, we are coping with the situation.
Pity on this. I really like what you shared there. I want to talk. I mean, there's two things I want to pick up there. I really like your idea of that polarity I gave. You interpreted it in a very interesting way of sometimes as a teacher, you're expounding and then you're giving things across to students and then you're bringing it back to your space and then giving across to them. I think that's that really sparks off some interesting thoughts about how that, what that links to in terms of how I think about teaching. So, yeah, I like that. I just want to say. And then, the online, yeah, what a year. I mean, and there's, there's so many people doing research. It's almost a bit tedious. There's some people, I don't know where they find the time from this year to be writing papers. There's lots of that happening. But the real challenges in the online space, and I think particularly as you spoke of earlier, so bandwidth is the real issue. So what we have at Virginia Tech, where I am, the students are on campus, but we do most of our teaching online, which is not fabulous. But the main thing is, of course, everyone's on EduRoam. So I teach in a synchronous manner where students are, you've also got synchronous, but a lot of my students have video on. And so I've been really playing with lots of different strategies to build interaction. And just take my hat off for you. I mean, you're clearly aiming in the right direction. It's tough. I think it'll be very, very tough. I would find it hard. Because I found even a class of 70, there are ways, but it's also partly because of the kind of class I'm teaching. I do actually get quite a lot of plenary feedback from students. Amazing you can do even in a group of 70, but yeah, it's tricky. Oh, no, I'd love to hear from Erica's. Marissa, can we go over to Erica?
Yes,
Want to talk a bit about projects and teamwork in the GAGE program?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. I'm going to try and switch on. You're about to share your video looking good. I don't know what, I don't know what I'm doing here, but as I can just talk, it might be interesting to get your feedback, Prof. Jenny, on in our module professional orientation. In the Engage program, it's a skills and practices based module, so it's very similar to the language and study skills that Marguerite and her colleagues are doing. But what we do there is we do a lot of training in the first semester on academic skills and academic reading and writing and IT. And then in the second semester, traditionally, we've always done projects where students need to apply what they've learned and do it in teams. Yes. So it was challenge for us this year to suddenly now move over to online. The first project, which we call our Go Green project, the students actually have to work in a team, and then they have to choose a topic, say paper or plastic or whatever, and then work with recycling or reusing and so on. Create a project which is either a product or a game, an online game, awareness, for both themselves and for the others. And then the second project is our Lego project, where the students build a tower crane with Lego blocks, and they have to pick up a weight in a competition by the end of it. In the past, they could physically build with the box of Lego blocks, and the record that they picked up was 12.5 kilograms. So it is actually a very good and a fun bring everything together. But this year, then we had to suddenly now decide, okay, with nobody on campus, no teams being able to meet, how do we do it? And we were actually quite astonished with the various platforms indicated that they would be using. WhatsApp, for instance, is just one, but Google Meet and collaborations and so on made it work. So we actually expected quite a lot of them. For them, for instance, now in the Lego, they had to defend their designs, and they had to do that online in a Google Meet session, and they did very well. So, you know, I think we put them under pressure, and ourselves as well. But it has actually worked quite well. My colleague Lauren Fouché is actually also in this session, and she manages the Lego project. And there, for instance, instead of the Lego box or the Lego blocks in it, we used Mecha blocks, and they're still conducting it, but virtually, and still having the competition. So the students actually amazed us in terms of their ability to take on the challenge and still communicate in a team when they're not, you know, city. So it has been quite a steep learning curve for all of us.
Well done. No, well done to you. Yeah, we're still in the thick of engaging in that, because our next semester course is even more actively project-based of the sort. Sounds like a very cool project you folks have. I do think the possibility for student, in some ways, the team-based work, and I hear you, it's hard work to set it up, but the tools like you mentioned, WhatsApp groups or GroupMe, all the rest, I find myself working actually more productively with the sort of teamwork elements of a first year engineering course. I feel for Gideon and the challenge of teaching mathematics in this kind of context. So, yeah, well, I think your point about the learning curve, I've really been fascinated for myself. Some things you can only, I think I had a lot of prejudice against aspects of online teaching, and that I've had to, I think of a much better perspective on both the opportunities and the limitations of teaching through an online space. And I mean, hey, like webinars, that's another whole talk, you know, just being able to do this right now. I think to my daughter, I'm just in a seminar at the University of Pretoria now. And if you think of how it would have seemed so second grade to have someone Skype in, so you will rather travel there, which is wonderful. I'd love to be on your campus again someday. But I mean, there is this ease with which we're just having so many more productive internationally based conversations, which really has made it. It's been one silver lining of the year, I'll say.
Thank you, Jenny. I just wanted to make a comment, which I was going to say after Gideon. Gideon, do you know that Blackboard Collaborate's got a whiteboard? And if you use a device like a tablet, you can actually write with your finger or a stylus, and you can use your exact same methodology that you would have used at the Blackboard.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Actually, I do that when we have our tutorial classes. That is where I actually use the tablet, where I then write on the board all the time. But I mean, when I have to get through a specific unit lecture, I try to, you know, it is time constrict. So I have to get through the slides, and I have to do some examples, and I have to let them do some examples, and it's time consuming. So, but I'm aware of that. My other problem is I'm left-handed. And from the start, I learned to use my mouse with my right hand. So when I use that board, I'm writing with my right hand and with a mouse. So you can imagine it looks like a dyslexic person who's trying to write. It's terrible to see my handwriting.
I'm in the same boat there. Anybody got another comment or a question that you'd like to ask Jenny? We've still got about 8 more minutes. And I think this has been a fantastic interaction. And I'm so pleased you left this amount of time for the discussion. Anybody else want to raise anything or follow up on anything? Lynn, welcome, Lynn. Take it.
Yeah, that was Grant taking the child to the dentist. He's back too, so we're both here. You asked us to comment on making resources available and memoranda.
Yeah, what's your thoughts?
Oh, it depends on the level of maturity of the student. So at the higher levels where the students are more mature and they're clearly showing effort, I give full memoranda. At first year, the bigger the assessment and where they need to check their work, then full. But for some of the others, you know they're looking for shortcuts because they're not mature enough. And what I have started to do is easy option of you just give the final answer, and if they can't get there, then they can keep working towards it. But I've tried to work out something similar where you can give almost hints of take your work. If you've got these aspects, then you're on the right. To give them that feedback. The feedback is meaningless unless they've tried the problem for themselves. Yeah, so that's it's a dilemma because some students would really, you're almost protecting the resources for the following generations.
Yeah, no, it's. I actually just, I don't have a clear view on this because it was kind of just the first time it's really popped up in a big way from student interviews. And I mean, obviously what's also changed now is the availability of solutions on the internet. Just, and I'm not talking about people paying for things, but, you know, I mean, there were a couple of people, at least of my kind of age bracket here, but, you know, you would be given the famous, like, physics problem where the ladder's against the wall or the like bricks on the slope or something. You'd have to, when there's a pulley, and you'd have to, you know, and you'd have to solve it. And that, at least you had another student who'd solved it. That was it. Now, like so many, there are a lot of resources in terms of problems that are worked through for students. And obviously there are things like Khan Academy. So yeah, it might also be by teaching students to use the resources of solved solutions, which is and when you talk around kind of, you know, what you talk about as maturity of students, I would also really talk as approach to learning. So we're trying to teach them, how do you navigate through this massive resources, and what is the downside of just copying a solution, because of course you're never really going to understand it. So a lot has to do, I think, also with just how legitimate students see the tasks that we give them, you know, and that relates to the relationship we have with them. It's Mariki's image of sitting around the fire, I guess. But Lynn, I hear you. I do also think that developing really good, challenging problems is something you can't do fresh every single year. We don't have that kind of time. So you want to use very strategically. Yeah, thank you for responding on that, because I still don't have a clear way of thinking about all of those comments from students. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. If there's anybody who wants to take the last question. I think we've exhausted them, it looks like. I just want to say, Jenny, you know, when I thought of this, inviting you, and the way that you've responded so willingly, I'm really grateful to. And I just want to tell people that, I mean, I can out you now, that she was one of the reviewers of the proposals for the referee proceedings. And she was just, the speed with which she did them was just amazing. And, you know, again, she just didn't hesitate. She said, no, of course I'll help. And the proceedings are now at an advanced stage, and we'll soon be having the book put out. So, and it's been a wonderful experience because we had to do that virtually as well. We were going to have writing workshops and things, but in the end we had to sort of do it on Zoom, and you know, it was quite a nice experience. So I think I'll give a hand on behalf of everyone. So thank you very much, and I just hope we keep in touch. I've recorded this session thanks to Bonzo, who reminded me. I always forget to record, and so I hope that those who are unable to attend will be able to listen to the talk. Thanks once again, Jenny. It's now 6 p.m. here, so you must be getting towards US lunchtime.
Yeah, it's true. No, so thanks. I mean, Marissa, if I can just say, I mean, it's so lovely being here. It's so lovely seeing faces and names that are familiar, meeting some new people. The wonderful thing about being an academic is you are always part of an international community. And then, of course, I've got a very strong foothold in South Africa, even though I work full-time now at a US university. So all of these kind of connections are really good for me. I wanted to make a final plug to say that I'm actually associate editor for South African Journal of Science. I've been doing for about a year, which covers education papers, but more broadly as well. And so maybe just to, it's a thing that I felt really nice way for me of keeping in touch with South African researchers. And obviously SAJS does publish education research. I mean, obviously it's looking for articles that are particularly interesting across a broader audience, but just to say, if you ever wanted to get in touch with me around that as well, that's one specific thing. And I still am an editor-in-chief for higher education, so those kind of conversations I'm also always very happy to have if people have got a paper and they're trying to think of where to publish it. So yeah, Marissa, it was lovely to be involved in your proceedings, lovely to be in the seminar, and we should all keep in touch, and you know where to find me on the email.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Lovely to have you here. And thanks to everybody for attending. And I'm going to switch off the recording now. Thank you. I don't know how to switch it off. Okay, I'll find it. Don't worry. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, it is. Hey. Right.
See if I can find my way out of here.
Hey, Marissa, lovely seeing you.